Greetings to my dear guests on this video. I wish you a pleasant viewing and look forward to your feedback in the comments. She still remembered the way the candlelight danced against the polished crystal, how the scent of cinnamon and roasted ham filled the room, and how no one seemed to breathe when the words left her father's mouth. "I've put up with you for a long time, but I've had enough. Get out of here." The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was agreement. That was the part that stung the most. Elizabeth leaned back in the hotel chair, eyes red, her fingers curled around a lukewarm cup of tea. It had been 3 days since that dinner, and the scene replayed in her head in nauseating detail, frame by frame. Every look, every clenched jaw, every fork tapping on china. She tried to piece it together. How had it come to this? Their relationship had never been easy. Richard Worthington had always been a man of principles, rigid as steel, with a voice that could silence a room. He demanded excellence, obedience, and most of all, control. And Elizabeth? She was born stubborn. Even as a child, she had questioned everything, refused to sit still, never quite fit the mold he tried to cast for her. But she wasn't a child anymore. At 41, she was the executive director of a successful nonprofit, financially independent, admired by colleagues. She paid her parents' mortgage, their medical bills, even the groceries. She had done it out of duty, maybe out of guilt, hoping that love might one day be earned. The days leading up to Christmas had been strained. Her mother, Vivian, had called twice about the tree. "Your father doesn't want a fake one this year. He says if you're coming, you can afford to do it right." Elizabeth had offered to send a delivery, but that wasn't the point. The point was obedience, presence, submission. When she arrived 2 days before Christmas, the house already felt like a pressure cooker. Her father barely looked up from his chair. "Still wearing those heels, huh?" he muttered. It was a dig. He always had one ready. Her mother flitted between rooms, overcompensating with casseroles and spiced cider, avoiding conversation that went deeper than the weather. And her younger brother Tyler brought his new girlfriend, pretending he didn't see the tension that choked every hallway. By Christmas Eve, Elizabeth had considered leaving. She'd almost booked a flight back to Boston, told herself she'd send a card and some money and be done with it. But guilt had kept her in the house, and pride. She didn't want to give her father the satisfaction of thinking he'd won. And then came Christmas dinner. The confrontation wasn't loud, but it was final. A comment about the way she dismissed Tyler's girlfriend, a sarcastic remark from her about her father's outdated views, and the explosion happened in slow motion. It was the 3rd day back in the house, and every wall in the Worthington home felt closer than before. Elizabeth sat by the window of the upstairs study, the only room no one ever entered. Outside, the frost had feathered the edges of the glass, casting soft white shadows on the carpet. She had retreated here after breakfast, after another pointed comment from her father about how people who work too much tend to forget what matters. He never said it directly. He never had to. Downstairs, Vivian hummed faintly as she washed dishes that had already been through the dishwasher. Tyler was on the phone in the den, talking loudly about a startup he wanted to invest in, using money he didn't have. His new girlfriend, Natalie, was helping Vivian with ribbons and bows, her voice overly sweet, like she was auditioning for a role in a family she didn't yet understand. Elizabeth had tried to contribute. She bought the tree. She brought the wine. She paid for the food on the table. And yet, there was always this edge to every interaction, as if her presence came with a price. The night before, she'd stayed up late with a book, only to overhear her parents arguing faintly through the vent. "She makes everything about herself," Richard had said. "Always has. All that money she throws around, it's just noise." "She's trying," Vivian replied, but her voice was thin, defeated. Elizabeth hadn't cried, not then. But the words had hollowed something inside her. She had come here out of duty, perhaps some misplaced sense of loyalty. But the house didn't want her. Not really. It wanted her money. Her silence. She flipped the book shut and stood. The quiet was too loud. Downstairs, she offered to help Vivian with the Christmas table setup. "Oh, don't worry about it, darling," her mother said quickly. "Natalie and I have a system." Of course they did. "Did you get the wine?" Vivian added, glancing at the door. "Yes, it's in the car. I'll bring it in." When she stepped outside, The air bit sharply at her face. The driveway was slick with ice. She reached into the back seat, grabbing the bag of carefully selected bottles, when she heard the front door creak. "Still playing delivery girl, I see," Richard said from the top step, arms crossed. She turned to face him. "I thought I'd contribute." He scoffed. "You always think you're contributing." Elizabeth froze. It was never one thing with him. Always these cuts, so clean, so subtle, you barely noticed until you were bleeding. She walked past him, back into the house. "You're welcome," she said quietly. "I didn't say thank you," he muttered. "And I won't." She stopped cold, turned to look at him. His face was as closed off as ever. For a brief moment, she wanted to scream, to lay it all out, the money, the years of support, the fact that she had made their retirement possible. But what would it change? He wouldn't hear her. He never had. Back upstairs, she pulled out her phone, needing to feel something that wasn't this house. The message from Mara was still there. "Hey, it's been a while. I heard you were home. Want to get coffee?" Elizabeth stared at it. Then typed, "When?" The coffee shop was nearly empty, save for a pair of college students studying in the corner and an elderly man reading the paper by the window. Elizabeth stirred her cappuccino, watching the foam collapse in slow spirals. When Mara finally arrived, hair tucked under a gray wool beanie, cheeks flushed from the cold, she looked almost exactly the same. "Liz," she said warmly, sliding into the seat across from her. "God, it's good to see you." Elizabeth smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You too. Thanks for texting. I wasn't sure you'd want to talk." Mara laughed softly. "I've wanted to talk for years. I just didn't know how to start." The conversation drifted for a few minutes. How long it had been. How strange the holidays could feel. But then something shifted. Mara leaned in, voice quiet. "Tyler told me you were home. I don't know why, but I felt like I needed to warn you." Elizabeth blinked. "Warn me?" Mara hesitated. "Your dad's been talking, a lot, about you, saying you're entitled, self-absorbed, that you use money to manipulate everyone, that you always make things worse when you show up." A heavy silence passed between them. Elizabeth didn't respond. She didn't need to. Mara went on carefully. "I saw how they treated you. I tried to say something once, remember? Thanksgiving, 3 years ago. You were helping in the kitchen, and your dad called you a failure in heels. Your mom just kept basting the turkey like she hadn't heard a thing." Elizabeth's throat tightened. "I do remember," she said. "That was the last time I came for Thanksgiving. I thought you might want someone to remind you you're not crazy." Elizabeth smiled again. This time, it almost reached her eyes. "Thank you." They talked for nearly an hour. About what it was like being around the Worthingtons, about Tyler's spiral after their breakup, about the chilling efficiency with which the family ignored pain, both their own and others. When they parted, Mara hugged her tightly. "Whatever happens this week, remember who you are outside that house." Elizabeth walked back through the snow slowly, the weight of those words following her like a shadow. It was Christmas Eve. The house glowed warmly from the outside, gold lights, a plastic Santa on the porch. But inside, it felt colder than the wind. Christmas Day arrived in silence. No music, no laughter. Breakfast was stiff, transactional. Dinner was worse. The table had been set with formality that felt almost ironic. Silver cutlery, fine china, candles Elizabeth had brought. Vivian said grace, voice trembling slightly. Tyler's girlfriend passed the breadbasket and tried too hard to smile. Elizabeth had barely touched her food when the air shifted. "You know," Richard said suddenly, slicing into his roast, "I've put up with you for a long time." All heads turned. "You walk in here with your money and your opinions, and we're all supposed to be grateful you decided to show up." Elizabeth's fork hovered above her plate. Richard's voice didn't rise, but the words cut deep. "I've had enough. You make everything harder. You poison every room you enter. So let me make this clear. Get out. I don't want you here." Vivian flinched, but said nothing. Tyler blinked, said nothing. Elizabeth looked from one face to the next. The silence that followed wasn't surprise. It was consent. She stood slowly, folded her napkin. Understood. Upstairs, she packed in silence. No one knocked. No one called after her. As she slid into her car and turned the engine, her hands were shaking. That night, back at the hotel, she logged into her bank account and terminated the monthly payments. Mortgage, insurance, utilities, canceled. For the first time in years, Elizabeth took her own side. 2 days after Christmas, Elizabeth sat by the fireplace in her hotel room, staring at the flickering flames without really seeing them. The silence no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like clarity. She hadn't answered any calls since that night. There hadn't been many, just 2 from an unknown number and 1 from her mother, which she let go to voicemail. Vivian's message was brief and oddly formal. "Elizabeth, your father's upset. Maybe we could talk when you calm down." When she calmed down. It would have been laughable if it weren't so predictable. The next morning, Mara met her again, this time with no small talk. "I heard something," she said, sliding into the cafe booth. "Tyler's been telling people you left in a tantrum, that you threatened the family, that you're unstable." Elizabeth blinked. "Of course, and that your parents don't need your money, that they're perfectly fine without you." Elizabeth smiled, not out of amusement but weariness. "I'm sure they are." But she knew better. Richard's pension was modest, and Vivian hadn't worked in over 30 years. The house wasn't even paid off. She'd taken care of the shortfall every month without complaint. For years, they lived well, because of her. It took 3 more days for the tone to change. First, a message from Vivian. Longer this time. Edged with desperation beneath the politeness. "We weren't expecting you to do anything drastic. The taxes are due next week, and we just assumed." Elizabeth didn't reply. The following morning, Richard called. No message. He called again that night. Still no message. By New Year's Eve, a text arrived from an unfamiliar number. "You can't just abandon your family like this. We're still your parents. This is cruel." She recognized the phrasing. Richard, short, punishing, not a request, a verdict. And then came the call from the bank. "Miss Worthington, we're reaching out to confirm a delinquency notice sent to the property at 215 Glenview Drive. The mortgage payment for January has not been received." Elizabeth thanked the woman, hung up, and exhaled slowly. She'd known it would come to this, that they would pretend to be proud, pretend they didn't need her, until the truth came knocking. And now it had. Later that night, as snow began to fall outside her hotel window, she sat on the floor with a glass of wine and began sorting through the years of bank statements. All the payments she'd made. All the cards she'd paid off. She pulled out a legal pad and began writing it down. Not to send to them. She wasn't ready for that yet. But she needed to see it. To know that she hadn't imagined it. $6,211 a month on average. Sometimes more. Over 9 years. More than $670,000. She stared at the total. It didn't feel real. She didn't cry. Instead, she opened her laptop and began researching real estate lawyers and estate accountants. Not for revenge. For records. For dignity. Let them squirm. She wouldn't be guilted again. It started subtly. The first time they came by, they didn't even ask. Vivian showed up on a Saturday morning without calling, clutching a paper bag of blueberry muffins from a bakery Elizabeth hadn't liked since college. "I thought you might want company," her mother said, too brightly, standing on the hotel threshold like someone who'd wandered into a stranger's life by mistake. Elizabeth let her in out of politeness. It had been weeks since the dinner. Weeks of silence, then rumors, then cold texts, and now, muffins. They sat awkwardly in the room's 2 chairs. Vivian asked about work, the nonprofit, the weather in Boston. She didn't bring up Christmas. She didn't mention Richard. Her face was a little paler, her hands a little more fragile. But the performance was the same, distance disguised as concern. "I know things were said," she murmured once, her eyes on the window. "But your father's had a lot on his mind. He doesn't always think before he speaks." Elizabeth didn't reply. She just sipped her tea and waited. "I told him he went too far," Vivian continued, softer now. "But, well, you know how men are." Elizabeth set the cup down. "No, Mom, I know how he is." Vivian flinched slightly. The conversation didn't last much longer. After she left, Elizabeth went back to her legal pad, checking over her notations of past payments. A part of her wanted to believe her mother had come to make peace, but another part, sharper, older, knew better. It wasn't peace. It was panic. A week later, it was Richard. He didn't knock. Just buzzed the front desk, and by the time Elizabeth got the call, he was already in the lobby. She came down out of courtesy, or maybe curiosity. He was standing stiffly, in a wool coat too heavy for the weather. "I was in the area," he said flatly. "No, you weren't," Elizabeth answered. He didn't smile. "I thought maybe we could talk." They sat on a bench outside, just out of earshot from the front doors. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just started talking about how families are complicated, about responsibility, about mutual respect. She let him speak. She didn't interrupt. Then he mentioned the house, how it was a lot to manage, how he and Vivian were exploring other arrangements, how mortgages and taxes get harder to juggle in retirement. "You made it clear I wasn't welcome in that house," Elizabeth said evenly. "You're still our daughter." "No," she said. "I was your investment." He flinched for just a second. "I don't owe you any more," she finished. He didn't argue, but his mouth twitched just slightly before he left. That night, when she returned to her room, something felt off. Her laptop, which she had left closed, was ajar. Her folders were slightly misaligned on the desk. She hadn't noticed them earlier, but now the disorder screamed at her. 2 financial files were left slightly open. Her phone charger unplugged and loosely coiled. A notebook she always kept zipped was unzipped. She froze. She'd had her documents spread out the day before. Records, statements, legal contact info, her preliminary letter of disengagement from the joint account her parents had access to. Her first thought wasn't fear. It was confirmation. They weren't visiting to reconcile. They were probing, panicking, trying to understand how far they'd pushed her and what they could still salvage. She double-checked her accounts, her passwords, enabled 2-factor authentication, and booked a small lockbox at the bank downtown. Then she packed up her folders and moved them out of the room. She wouldn't stay in that hotel another night. By morning, she had checked into another place, under a different name. Just in case. By the end of January, the snow had thickened, and so had the silence from her family. Elizabeth was now staying in a small, quiet apartment she'd sublet from a friend. The hotel had started to feel like a target. Here, she felt less visible, safer. She didn't answer unknown numbers anymore. She filtered her emails. She kept her laptop in a locked drawer when she wasn't home and checked her door twice before bed. She wasn't paranoid. She was prepared. Or so she thought. On a gray Tuesday morning, Elizabeth received a call from her bank's fraud department. "Hi, Miss Worthington. This is Karen from First Driver Security. We noticed several failed login attempts on your online account, 7 to be precise, all from different IP addresses in the last 24 hours. Elizabeth's heart slowed. "Where from?" Karen hesitated. "The majority appear to originate from your home state, 1 from out of state, and 1 international, possibly routed through a VPN. Elizabeth didn't know what to say. What are they trying to access? Checking account, primarily, then savings, then your wire transfer history. Her mouth went dry. "Is this an account you share with anyone?" Karen asked. "No," she said quickly. "It's mine alone. I don't share credentials." "All right. We've locked down the account for now, and will issue new credentials via secure mail. I strongly recommend setting up biometric access if possible." Elizabeth thanked her and hung up. She stared at the phone, stomach turning. It had to be a coincidence, a data breach, a phishing bot, something explainable. But the timing, the patterns, the exact accounts they tried to get into, the ones she'd used to pay for her parents' mortgage and utilities. She called Mara. "Do you think it's them?" she asked, voice quiet. There was a long pause on the other end. "I think you already know it is," Mara finally said. "You just don't want it to be true." Elizabeth sat down on the floor. "How could they do this?" "They think you're an asset," Mara said. "Not a person." Elizabeth didn't respond. She stared at her phone screen until it went dark. The next evening, while walking back from the grocery store, she saw it, just for a second. A familiar silver car parked on the opposite side of the street. A model she recognized, her father's old sedan. She kept walking, heart in her throat. Didn't look twice, didn't confirm. But 2 nights later, it was there again. And then again. Not always close, never more than once in a day. But enough to notice. Enough to know. She didn't call the police. Not yet. She didn't have proof, and the last thing she wanted was to escalate without being sure. She told herself it might not be them, that it might be coincidence, that her mind might be playing tricks on her. But she started keeping her curtains closed. She started walking with her keys clenched in her fist. She started double-checking the back seat of her car before getting in. She didn't want to believe it. Not her parents. Not the people she had supported, protected, tried to love. But trust, once broken, doesn't bend. It snaps, and the pieces can cut you long after they've fallen. It was a cold Thursday afternoon when Mara called, her voice tense, more serious than Elizabeth had ever heard it. "Are you alone right now?" she asked. Elizabeth froze. "Yes, why?" "I need to tell you something, and I didn't want to text it. I didn't want it in writing." Elizabeth sat down slowly. "Go on." Mara hesitated, then said, "I ran into Tyler." Elizabeth didn't speak, didn't breathe. "He doesn't know we've been talking," Mara continued. "We bumped into each other at a bar downtown. He was drunk and stupid." "What did he say?" Mara's voice was calm, but there was a tremor beneath it. "He said you think you're safe, that you think walking away means you win." He laughed, said you'd pay for it soon. Elizabeth gripped the edge of the table. "That sounds like him." "That's not all," Mara added. "He told someone, loudly, that it was his idea to cut you off, that he convinced your parents to stop pretending. He said if you wouldn't hand things over willingly, you'd be forced." A long silence followed. Elizabeth whispered, "He's the one who pushed them." "He is, and he's involved in whatever's going on now. I don't know how far it goes, but Liz, I think you're being followed." Elizabeth leaned back, the room spinning for a moment. "I thought it was just my parents." "I think they're all involved, and I think Tyler's leading it." Later that evening, Elizabeth opened the tracking app she had installed after noticing the silver sedan. She'd managed to discreetly attach a tracker to the bumper one night when it was parked down the street. It pinged again, same location, 4 blocks from her new apartment. Sitting, waiting. She stared at the screen. Her brother. It had to be him. She never remembered him being cruel. Arrogant, yes, ungrateful, careless. But not this. Not someone who could hurt her. But memory had a funny way of rewriting things. She thought back to their childhood, the subtle favoritism. How he would steal from her room and then watch silently while she was punished. How he lied to their parents about her bad attitude, manipulating them into seeing her as the problem. And how Richard always listened. Maybe he'd always known exactly what he was doing. That night, Elizabeth didn't sleep. She sat with a pen and notebook, drafting a report for the police. She didn't send it yet, but she needed to have it. Just in case. She made copies of her financial records, her login changes, the screenshots of failed login attempts, and all texts from her family. She stored one copy with a lawyer she found online that very night, another in a secure digital vault. They would not trap her again. Not financially, not emotionally, not physically. The next day, she noticed someone following her from the grocery store. Not the sedan this time. Someone on foot. A man in a beanie and gray coat, walking too slowly, looking too often. She ducked into a bookstore, waited 20 minutes, then circled back through a different street to be sure. He was gone. For now. Mara called again that evening. "You need to consider going to the police." "I'm almost there," Elizabeth said. "Don't wait too long," Mara said quietly. "They're not playing fair." Elizabeth nodded, though no one could see her. They never did. It was no longer about fear. It was about control. Elizabeth sat at the kitchen table in the small apartment, a whiteboard propped up against the wall, half covered in notes and arrows. She had moved beyond hiding. Now she was planning. The roles had reversed, and it gave her back something she hadn't felt in months. Power. They need to believe you're vulnerable, Mara said over the phone. That you're still confused, still scared. If you can draw them out, we might finally have something solid. Elizabeth nodded, staring at her handwriting. Dates, vehicle sightings, suspicious lodgings. And if they're watching me? They already are, Mara said gently. You just have to let them think it's working. The trap wasn't complicated, but it had to be believable. Elizabeth would move back into her original hotel under her name, publicly reappear on social media with vague, cheerful updates, and act as though she had dropped her guard. At the same time, she asked 3 friends, former colleagues, people she trusted implicitly, to stay in the hotel room next to hers. 2 men and a woman. Quiet, smart, loyal. She didn't give them all the details, just enough. I may be dealing with a family matter. It's escalated. I just need you nearby. They didn't ask more. They didn't need to. On a Friday morning, Elizabeth checked into the hotel again. She kept the curtains drawn, but left the desk cluttered, folders, envelopes, and her laptop clearly visible from the hallway if anyone managed to open the door. The decoy laptop was old, wiped, filled with dummy spreadsheets. The papers were real but irrelevant. Old non-profit reports, financial breakdowns that had nothing to do with her current holdings. She gave the front desk instructions. No calls transferred, no guests allowed up without approval. She bought pepper spray. She slept with it beside her. For 3 days, nothing happened. Then, on the 4th night, she returned from a walk to find the lock slightly scratched. Nothing was missing. Nothing overtly moved. But on the white envelope labeled Account Summary Feb, someone had left an oily fingerprint. She photographed it, calmly, sent it to her lawyer. That same night, one of her friends texted from the adjacent room. He's back, same guy in the sedan, just parked across the street. Been there since 6. Elizabeth's stomach tightened. It wasn't just surveillance anymore. It was anticipation. She waited 2 more days. Then she posted something on her old Facebook account, an account she hadn't used in months. Thankful to finally be healing. Everything's back on track. Ready to move forward. Grateful for those who stood by me. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't false. But it was bait. The next morning, the fingerprint envelope was gone. In its place, a single sheet of paper had been slid under the door. Elizabeth unfolded it slowly. A printout of a wire transfer from 5 years ago. One she had made to cover Tyler's legal fees. Scrawled across the bottom in handwriting, she recognized, "You owe us." One way or another. Elizabeth did not scream. She didn't cry. She didn't burn the note or tear it to shreds. She read it once, then again. Then she made a copy. The next day, she contacted her attorney, Anne, a woman recommended by Mara's colleague, and emailed everything. The photos, the fingerprints, the login logs, the texts, and now, the note. Within the hour, Anne replied, "You have more than enough. This isn't just harassment. It borders on fraud and coercion. We move now." Elizabeth gave her the green light. And then, for the first time in her life, she prepared to take her family to court. It wasn't about revenge, not exactly. It was about truth. Over the following week, Elizabeth coordinated with Anne to begin the formal process of freezing any remaining joint assets, revoking powers of attorney she hadn't realized were still active, and submitting an official police report with copies of all documentation. She expected her parents to panic, but she didn't expect what came next. 3 days after the complaint was filed, Elizabeth received an invitation. A letter, handwritten, from Vivian. "Elizabeth, please come to the house, just once. No anger, no drama, just talk. Your father wants to make peace. We all do. Love, Mom." Elizabeth showed it to Anne. "What do you think?" Anne didn't blink. "I think it's a setup. Go, if you want to, but don't go alone, and don't go unarmed." Elizabeth agreed. She asked one of her friends from the hotel team to wait nearby in a car with a recording device running. Mara insisted on being on call. Elizabeth wore a wire. When she arrived, the house was quiet. Nothing like the tension-ridden holiday she had left behind. Vivian met her at the door. She looked older than before, as if time had worn her down in just a few weeks. "Thank you for coming," she said. "He's in the living room." Elizabeth stepped inside. The air smelled like lemon polish and denial. Richard sat by the fireplace, whiskey in hand. Tyler stood leaning against the far wall, arms folded, smirking. "Sit down," Richard said. Elizabeth didn't move. "No, say what you want." Richard looked up slowly. "You've made a mess." "No," Elizabeth said. "I cleaned one up." He didn't argue. Tyler spoke instead. "You really think the courts will side with you? Family disputes go nowhere. You'll waste your time and money." Elizabeth pulled out her phone. "Then why are you so nervous?" He looked away. She reached into her bag and removed a thin envelope. "Here, these are copies of everything I've filed. Police report, financial audit, lawyer's letter of intent. You've got 3 days to respond before this becomes public." Vivian blinked. "Elizabeth, don't do this. We're your family." Elizabeth turned to her. "Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't stalk. Family doesn't threaten." Richard's voice was cold. "You think you're better than us." "No," she said, "but I'm done letting you treat me like I'm less." She turned to go, but at the door, she stopped. "By the way," she said quietly, "check your bank accounts. You're going to see the money I gave you over the years has been classified as non-repayable gifts, documented, declared, and irrevocable. You can't sue me for a dime. You'd have to admit fraud yourselves." Tyler's face drained of color. Elizabeth walked out. 2 weeks later, the charges were filed. The district attorney's office reviewed the police report and corroborating evidence. The failed login attempts, the wire fraud threats, the surveillance footage from the hotel. But it was the note, signed in Tyler's handwriting, with financial records attached, that tipped everything. Elizabeth didn't attend the initial court appearance. Her lawyer handled it. She received updates by email. Tyler was officially under investigation for attempted extortion, cyber harassment, and unlawful surveillance. The state froze his accounts pending review. Her parents weren't charged, at least not criminally. But the court order named them as parties in a civil suit Elizabeth filed. Undue enrichment, emotional distress, and misappropriation of funds. They would be called to testify. The family name, once so carefully protected, so rehearsed, was now being whispered among neighbors and former friends. In quiet suburbs, shame echoes loudest. Vivian sent another letter, this one scribbled in frantic cursive on hotel stationery. "You've ruined everything. We only wanted what was fair. You never loved us. You'll die alone." Elizabeth folded the letter into a drawer without reading it again. She no longer needed the words to understand them. She knew now, it had never been about love. It had always been about control. And when control disappeared, they collapsed. Tyler tried to contact her, twice through a blocked number, once by email. His lawyer, she assumed. But her legal team handled it all. She didn't engage, not once. She owed them nothing, not a conversation, not a response. The silence this time was hers, and it was earned. In the spring, Elizabeth moved into a townhouse on a quiet street in a different city. Nothing fancy, just a place that smelled like possibility. Mara helped her unpack the kitchen. They didn't talk about Christmas or court or family. They just poured wine, arranged the glasses, and listened to records like they had in college. One night, a neighbor waved to her from across the lawn. A woman around her age, silver-haired, kind eyes, an old Labrador by her side. Elizabeth waved back. For the first time in a long time, the gesture didn't feel like pretending. She was rebuilding. Not from disaster, but from survival. She began working on a project close to her heart, a legal aid program for women over 40 who'd been financially manipulated or emotionally coerced by family. She called it Silent Daughters. Every week, she sat across from women who had once believed it was their job to hold their families together, until it broke them. And every week, she told them what Mara once told her. "You're not crazy, and you're not alone." It wasn't revenge. It was justice. And Healing Spring turned into summer, and with it came a kind of warmth Elizabeth hadn't known in years. Not the sun on her skin, but something softer, more internal. It was the absence of fear, the end of pretending. Her days fell into a steady rhythm. Mornings began with coffee on her tiny balcony, where lavender bloomed in a ceramic pot she bought from a local artist. She read the paper the old-fashioned way, folded across her lap, and left her phone on silent. Silent Daughters was growing faster than she expected. After a local article profiled her initiative, dozens of emails poured in from women, older, younger, some newly divorced, others widowed, many still married, each with the same story in a different voice. I gave them everything. I thought that meant they'd love me. Elizabeth responded to each one herself. She'd thought the work might reopen old wounds. Instead, it stitched something closed. On Saturdays, Mara visited. Sometimes they just walked, miles without speaking, side by side through quiet neighborhoods. Other times, they sat on the floor of Elizabeth's living room, sorting intake forms, drinking rosé, and pretending they were still 25. One evening, as cicadas buzzed outside, Mara looked up from a stack of files. "You've changed." Elizabeth tilted her head. "How?" "You don't ask if you're overreacting anymore." Elizabeth smiled, and she didn't. In July, she adopted a dog from a local shelter, a golden retriever mix with soulful eyes and one ear that refused to stay up straight. She named him Franklin, after her favorite poet. He followed her everywhere, slept beside her desk, barked at delivery trucks like he was guarding a castle. Elizabeth no longer jumped when she heard footsteps behind her. She no longer scanned faces in parking lots. She no longer kept her keys clutched between her fingers. The court case hadn't vanished. Her parents' lawyer had tried to delay proceedings, but her legal team was solid, professional, patient. The process would be long, but the outcome was no longer the point. She'd already won. By August, she began speaking at small conferences, not about her family, but about boundaries, about financial independence, about reclaiming your story when others have tried to write it for you. After one talk, a woman approached her in tears. "I thought it was just me," she whispered. Elizabeth placed a hand over hers. "It never is." One evening in September, after a particularly beautiful sunset, Elizabeth received a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a faded photograph, her, age 7, arms around a young golden retriever, grinning up at the camera. On the back, in unfamiliar handwriting, "You were always strong. You just didn't know it yet." She never figured out who sent it, but she kept it on her desk beside Franklin's treats. Autumn came, and with it, a rare calm. Her life was no longer a performance. There were no more traps to avoid, no guilt to navigate, no love to earn, just sunlight through a window, quiet mornings, a dog at her feet, and the knowledge that she had survived, rebuilt, and this time on her own terms.